Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Friday's episode of Hollywood Breaks. It's good to be with you here this morning. I have our number one Hollywood insider with many deep friends in his pocket, Keith Rao. Keith, please say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here yet again on a wonderful Friday.
We've already been chatting it up a little bit here because we are waiting for our clubhouse meeting to get started. So we had to spend the last few minutes just talking about Steven Spielberg's career. As Keith said, Spielberg is our childhood. And a lot of stuff we're trying to do here in Hollywood Breaks is actually kind of just talk through what we know to be true about what Hollywood used to be and then what this new Hollywood thing is. There's this tipping point that we feel we're on the edge of where people are coming to grips with that the new Hollywood has arrived, where I feel like for the last few years, we've been talking about that it's going away, but we didn't know where it's going. So Hollywood Breaks really here is to start talking about like, what do we see in trends, ideas, some of the new pop reality of what's going on, and really some of the opportunities as filmmakers, content makers, what this new Hollywood brings to us. And there's so many great opportunities. If we just listen to all the studio execs and big players, all you're going to hear is them a bunch of lamenting of what used to be. We want to focus on the new opportunity. So with that set up, I kind of want to just talk about really quickly the movie poster behind you. You have David Fincher's Fight Club, which great. I think that came, I worked with Fincher on Seven, did the opening credits with him. I think Seven might have been his second film. He did Alien, I know that right before.
Yes, right.
And I gotta be honest, working with him, I do believe everyone was a little confused of what his vision really was. If you know what a ground glass is in filmmaking, which is like the eyepiece the director looks through in a camera.
Yeah.
Fincher was not happy with industry standard ground glasses, so he had his own cut to meet his own kind of look and feel. That way, when it transferred to video or anything else, he knew everything he wanted to was going to be in frame the way he wanted it. And I like that kind of genius that wants to rethink or see things for the world. I think is what his legacy really is. And then obviously we worked with him at Seven. Fight Club is 2 films later after the Game one.
Yeah, this poster obviously is famous because the tagline, first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club, which has obviously been a cultural milestone, if you will. It's interesting history of this movie. It was not very popular when it released. It kind of found its audience when it came into home video. And it wasn't really beloved by the studio, quite frankly. This was sort of like right after Rupert Murdoch had purchased 20th Century Fox, or not right after, but sort of down the road. He was still involved in Hollywood, and I believe it was actually Lachlan Murdoch, the son, who's now CEO of News Corp, who actually championed this movie. And it is a great movie, visually unbelievably cool. I worked a little bit with him on Gone Girl when I was at Fox, and that movie was great. But going through the process and sort of how he visualizes things is it's quite striking, because you're right. That's a great way to look at it. Is like he's always looking to reinvent the wheel. He doesn't want to do things just how they've been done in the past. And I think that aesthetic and that sort of vision is what the industry really needs right now.
Well, I remember having this moment with the some of the finishers that we were working with, the editorial house and the people that had kind of finished the film. And there was this constant reference of how Fincher used to hang out in all these like optical houses and whatever, learning, even the lab. He would go to the lab to figure out how the lab worked and the lab process worked. And then he brought that into it. He directed a music video for the Rolling Stones, and he had this concept of what he was trying to accomplish in camera by doing all this experience. So even the printing of the film Seven it was called die cut, or there's like a special secondary process that he did to add more grain to the film. So I like to tell people, like, when people say they love the Seven title sequence or love the movie Seven, and I always say, like, if you didn't see in the film, in the theater, you actually will never see the original, because you don't get that visual appeal of looking through that grainy quality that it's not on the negative, it was on the printing process. So you had to watch it through a print of the film through a projector onto a screen in order to ever see that. which of course
Wow.
nothing is printed again except for
No.
Quentin Tarantino movies or whatever.
It's all digital delivery at this point. It just comes on a flash drive.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane.
Unless it's a Christopher Nolan film, then he's still big on film.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I think there's a few filmmakers that will do something in special release. But if you ever get a chance, by the way, if for some reason they're going to show a film print of something in your neighborhood, please go see it. This digital stuff that we see now is not the same. All right, nope. Talking about, like, we don't want to become these old people that we're talking about in Hollywood breaks that are stuck in something. But there is a quality, if we look back, that is there, and then looking forward, you can understand what holds back some of these creative filmmakers. This week, I'm just going to kind of pick on a couple of small things this week to start things off. The Paramount Plus was talked about just, was it launched yesterday, 2 days ago? Yesterday?
No, I believe yesterday was the investor presentation on the Paramount lot, I believe. And then it launches in the US on March 4th.
March 4th, okay.
Yes.
So we're coming up on Paramount Plus. But from what you were saying earlier, you recognize that after the investor presentation, stocks dropped. So there was something that the investors didn't fully back.
Well, it was kind of it was kind of interesting because the analysts who were there were sort of wowed by it. But the stock dipped it's up about 2% now, but it was down closing around 4%, I think. So it's sort of like, is the sort of bloom off the rose if you're not, or is it just because they're not Disney Plus and they don't have sort of the branding and the IP and all the advantages that sort of give Disney Plus the edge? And again, they're kind of late to the game. They're the last major conglomerate to put a streaming service out. I mean, they had CBS All Access, but now it's all Paramount Plus, and they've got a bunch of original. They had a lot of plans for originals. We'll see if that all shakes out. Like, they're bringing Frasier back, was one of the bigger ones. They're doing.
Do we want to see that? Do we really want to watch Frasier? But I
like the original, but I don't know if I'd want to see a reboot.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, sorry. And then they're also doing a Godfather, the making of Godfather type movie, and then it's called The Offer. And then they're doing the makers behind the OC and Gossip Girl are doing a reboot of Love Story. For those of you who are super young and don't remember, that was a Tim, you're going to have to help me out here. It was a Paramount movie with oh God, I'm totally blanking.
Dude,
Ally McGraw. Woohoo! Ally McGraw, and it was Robert Evans at Paramount. The kid stays in the picture.
Oh yeah, Bob Evans, of course.
Yeah, Bob Evans. So not the Breakfast Chain.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the Kid Stays in the Picture documentary, like that.
Oh, the book was great. The book's even better. So you gotta read the book. The book's
classic.
Anyway, so they're remaking that and sort of like I don't know if it's gonna be like Gossip Girl or anyway.
But I'm with you. I think they're late to the game. I mean, we already Discovery Plus already has 11 million subscribers. When Discovery beats you to the OTT field and you're a film studio,
well,
what are you waiting for? I mean, I guess CBS All Access had a pretty good following.
I mean, to be fair, they had CBS All Access, and they did have Picard, which was sort of a hit in the sort of genre area. So they had stuff there already. So it's just, I don't know if it's maybe they haven't had anything big and flashy yet. Now, the other big announcement that came out obviously was that they're going to move some films, including, I believe, Top Gun Maverick, to Paramount Plus 45 days after theatrical release. So that's sort of the bigger news that's coming out of it. Again, we're talking about shrinking windows and, 45 days, it's going to go there. And I don't know about the next Mission Impossible. I think that's still debated. But they also had to redo a deal with Epix because Epix had the deal for direct, once a movie was in the theater, in the home entertainment or the VOD window, it goes to Epix. But they had to redo that deal. So now some movies will go to Epix for 90 days and then go to Paramount Plus. But not some of the bigger ones are probably going to go to Paramount Plus 45 days.
And I think we're going to see the days where we're soon where the studio is just going to own the theater. Like they're going to have the theater release under their control, then straight to their OTT platform under their control. There's no reason to kind of like push to these other outlets if they're going to try to get subscribers into the OTT space.
Well, we've talked about that a little bit, but I mean, I haven't heard any moves yet, but again, I'm not in sort of the corporate boardroom, so I'm sure there's some conversations already happening with regard, especially with like Disney and NBC Universal, who have brand units under the corporate umbrella who are used to sort of designing exhibits and entertainment and that kind of thing.
What's funny about it, or interesting about Paramount, is that they went from a CBS platform, which is traditionally television, to Paramount, the studio. Almost the opposite move of what Warner Brothers and Universal did, going from the studio brand to their television brand.
Yeah.
And Disney, of course, they kind of, I guess they stayed within their studio brand for all their feature films. They didn't downsize it to like an ABC or something like that.
Well, they have the sort of areas like have Disney, they have Pixar, Marvel, Lucas, Star Wars, Nat Geo underneath the Disney umbrella.
Yeah, they kind of made channels on their platform opposed to this. But interesting, we'll see which one plays itself out. I honestly feel like the Warner Brothers Universal move downgrades the experience, especially if you're thinking of it as a theatrical release. But if you're leaving theatrical open because you want to do theater first, then it kind of fills the place of the VOD broadcast space that film used to have. So
I think a little bit of it is the branding aspect. I think particularly with Disney really, if you break it all down in sort of movie world, Disney's the only studio that has brand. You see the Disney logo, you know what you're getting. You see the Paramount logo, you see the Universal logo, it's a mishmash. You never know what's coming. But Disney has brands. Mm-hmm. Even when it comes down, you will see Marvel, the Marvel logo, you see the Lucasfilm logo, you know what to expect. But the other studios don't really have that. So I think they were leaning on what they felt was a more attachable brand. Whereas, Peacock, sort of like NBC, but not really. HBO, obviously they wanted to attach to HBO, which is sort of a stellar brand when it comes to sort of adult fare and adult type shows. A lot of people would argue that turning it into HBO Max hurt HBO, the brand. And some of the evidence exists that that's the case.
Yeah, and then you look HBO at Go.
Yeah, and then you look at sort of with CBS All Access. CBS, unfortunately, for better or worse, is older programming. It's older adults. And I think they felt, I know they hired Droga5 to do this whole big rebrand, and they came up with Paramount Plus. Like,
there you go.
I mean, there you go. So, but I think they felt, to your point, that if you lean more on sort of the bigger theatrical movie type name versus just a TV name, you feel like you're going for something a little bigger. And maybe that was sort of the justification behind it.
All right, let's pivot here because there's a kind of another, we'll say, traditional Hollywood experience, which is the Golden Globes, is something that's coming at us this weekend as well. Very interesting that the Globes are happening because there's usually Globes is a celebration of film and it's a precursor to what we're going to see in the Oscar season, the nominees and the wins or whatever. I would not have known the Globes is happening if you didn't tell me this on our briefing this morning. So,
well, it's only because I've seen the promos. That's, I mean, really the only reason I realized it was this weekend because of the promos.
But the disconnect is real. Like the disconnect of like, I mean, were there films? Did something happen? I saw recently the Academy, the Oscar Academy, released a list of films that were eligible. So even almost like they became the promoters of like, just in case there were some films, we're going to give you a list of what, so there's like
to be fair to the Globes, it does involve TV shows. It's the only award show that's sort of considered a precursor to Oscars that has both film and TV. So what's somewhat cool about watching the Globes is, one, it's a little bit crazier because people drink the whole time because you're sitting at a table and you've got the Moet champagne that just flows like water.
Yeah. And
you've got a little more edgy hosts. This year it's Tina and Amy again, which I'm sure their opening numbers will be will be funny. But it's also
but nothing
involves.
will beat Ricky Gervais. That opening.
Yeah, it's not going to be a roasting. It's not going to be a full-on roasting like it was last year. But
yeah.
It's the combination of sort of the booze flowing and then having both movie and TV stars in one room. So that's sort of the interest of it, but it's not going to be like that this year. Like, I don't even know if I've heard that they've told some nominees to not have friends over. So I don't know if that means they're going to just stand up at their house. It's going to be, it might be similar to the Emmys, because I thought the Emmys did an okay job with that, where it was, like, all the shows were sort of in their own little pods. You could potentially do that with the films, like all the little films could be in their own little pods and the shows will be. I don't know how it's going to flow, but you're right. It goes to the point of, like, were there any movies released this year? Like, no, not, well, they were technically, but did any of them really churn any sort of cultural conversation? No.
Yeah, they didn't.
Really.
Nothing really stuck, or if they did, it feels like 20 years ago. I mean, if you were to tell me a film that came out in November qualified, I wouldn't even know if I saw the film or not. There's such a disconnect happening, which really does kind of paint the picture of what the opportunities coming through the Hollywood experience. I read this last week that like the major networks are dropping the ratings, the overnight ratings anymore. So the Variety was just reporting that NBC is doing that recently, and that recognition, like how content is viewed and the value of content isn't just in that one-time pop culture experience. Just for people to know, overnight ratings are the ratings where you kind of know that they call it going live. It's the first time that show is broadcast. And if you have a good following or a strong following, something like Seinfeld, your overnight ratings basically captured a good 20% of the audience or something like that. Now the ratings are sub 1% of all viewing. So here's the quote. I think this is a cool quote, Keith. This is Stuart Levine from NBC, and he in making this decision of just dropping overnight ratings as a measuring stick for their company. Which, again, if you're an advertiser during that half-hour block, you want to know that everyone was watching that network at that time because you want the eyeballs for your marketing. He said, "We didn't come to this decision lightly, but we believe it's important to accurately reflect how the television business is changing." Or you and I say changed.
Yeah.
Specifically, how these early ratings numbers are no longer representative of the performance of a particular show or series. So, like, what he's really saying is, like, yeah, sure, the first time it's shown doesn't really express all the time people go to watch the show. So one thing I'm picking up there is that these overnight numbers are not the only numbers they're looking at. And clearly they have to give advertisers some number and some ratings in order to get those commercial dollars in.
Yeah.
But clearly this is a major player saying, yeah, the old is gone and the new has come. And that representation of what's happening is going to be something that are going to make major business decisions in these platforms, how they're going to choose people to make content with, how they're going to judge if that content is successful. And honestly, how us viewers are going to start recognizing and representing, oh, was it a good film? If it's a blockbuster hit, we know it, but we don't have any visibility now of how we're all knowing that we're seeing the same thing or watching the same content.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can remember back in the day. I'm going to sound like the old guy and say, "Get these kids off my lawn!" But back in the day, I can remember when Friends was drawing 30 million viewers a week, and we would, if we looked at tracking, which is sort of what movie industry uses to sort of gauge how well a campaign is penetrating the culture. And we were like 5 or 6 points down to where we felt we needed to be to have a good opening weekend. We could just run a spot on Friends, and we would guarantee get a 5 to 6, 10-point bounce on tracking the next day. That was that just sort of, and that was like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. We're not talking like a long, long time ago. We're talking like recently. And now I think what you're seeing, and this also ties a little bit about something you and I sort of bantered about earlier this week, in terms of the studios doing the same thing, sort of holding back numbers. It's because I think, yes, there is a sense that the metrics have shifted, and they tried to accommodate for it for like live +1, live +3, live +7. For those of you who don't know typical ratings, that means what the rating is over 3 days, the day of, and then 3 days after, the day of, and 7 days after. Even that sort of hasn't become sort of a standard anymore because people are just watching whenever they can. And I think what's also that's driving a lot of this is the idea that the wide press is not necessarily going to dive into the details of why a show got bad ratings or why a movie got poor box office.
Or can justify it. You're right. There used to be people that basically grab the ratings and then do a review based on why it performed in certain ways. Now because there isn't any real indicator why that's happening. Nobody knows yet.
Everyone loves to sort of write the first like critical broadside against a movie that was supposed to be a huge hit and turns out to not be a huge hit. Like the same thing with a TV show. And I think they know that the press is never going to give all. It's about the headlines. It's about the clicks. So if you need that headline, the headline is not going to be this show. The example they used in the article was Young Rock. It's not like Young Rock is going to be, is a huge hit. It's going to be Young Rock premieres with disappointing numbers. And then that drives the narrative, like for the rest of the week. And then anytime The Rock's interviewed or Dwayne Johnson's interviewed, it's going to be, well, how do you feel about your show tanking? Like, it's not going to be like, oh, Young Rock had this number, but it doesn't really count for X, Y, and Z. That'll probably be buried down in like paragraph 6. So that I think is also something.
But making this decision, they're wiping out the ability to kind of have that narrative take place, right? That's some of this goal is like, we're not going to use those numbers anymore because those aren't really giving the full picture of what's actually with our content. So by them unsubscribing to that kind of viewership or the kind of rating system is asking the press or the followers to recognize like there's a different conversion taking place here. And that's, we're seeing that across the spectrum, like not only just on television. This is NBC pulling away and saying long gone are the days that, everyone really watched things live. I think the pandemic turned the same thing into theaters. Like no longer are the days where movies are only seen in the theaters, how you would take that same quote and move it there. And therefore the numbers were going to count, the visibility going to count, or even a filmmaker's credit is no longer have the blockbuster numbers attached to their credit. We were going through the Spielberg's list. All we could, for the first 20 years, there isn't one film that's not a blockbuster. There isn't one in a 20-year span. That will never happen again because there are no longer blockbusters at the same scale anymore. So that era has ended. Those filmmakers have ended, and the scores ended. That changed all of our careers, by the way. If you're a content maker, that totally changes your career. What your goalpost is going to be is very different. What the yard markers are along the way can be very different. And even who you want to make deals with, each theater might or each studio will make different deals with you to give you different returns. Hey, if I'm Disney, I'm going to get you numbers on my platform. Oh, if you're Warner Brothers or Paramount, I'm going to get you, more visibility, more artistic flair. That kind of decision making is going to be more relevant to people living out this career.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a part of the overarching change that's sort of happening. And we've talked a little bit about sort of the deal making and how that's going to alter, and the headaches, excuse me, that have been created by HBO Max shifting all their movies onto, Warner Brothers shifting all their movies onto HBO Max, and sort of the headaches it's causing with talent. And, it was interesting because Tom Rothman, who is the CEO of Sony Pictures Entertainment, he did a podcast this past week with a gentleman by the name of Paul Rabel, I guess. I apologize if I'm butchering your name, Paul. But it's called Suiting Up, and he's a former lacrosse player. Tom Rothman's a big lacrosse player, was a big lacrosse player at Brown. And he gave sort of a long-ranging conversation about the industry. So it was really interesting to listen to this because it's the first sort of like conversation that has been had where it's not like a press presentation or an investor presentation where there's sort of a script that's assigned. It was Tom Rothman just sort of riffing on what he thinks lies ahead. And Tom's been in the business for a long time. I worked with him at Fox. He's a hard-nosed guy, knows what he wants, and he drives his team much like a basketball coach drives his team to perform at their best. And I think it's really interesting to listen to his perspective. And you brought up the fact about talent, and the way Tom is sort of like framing what's going to happen is that talent really wants to have a cultural impact. Now, you made this point earlier that all content makers want to have a cultural impact, but that's something that's distinctive about sort of the movie going experience. And I think Tom realizes that, and he thinks that's still something that is going to keep talent coming back to the big studios and wanting that theatrical release. And it ties into sort of the whole idea of their deals. Like if my movie's going to get pumped to streaming, what's the money going to look like? But they also want that cultural impact, and they want sort of and that really comes with a theatrical release. And I think that's something that is definitely going to be a part of the conversation. And he also made the point that a lot of what ends up on the streamers is not the highest quality, which you and I have talked about, especially when it comes to Netflix. Some of the stuff that goes on there is not that spectacular.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So it is interesting to see.
But he thinks that people are going to come into the theaters. Like his belief is that there will be theater goers in the future. And so there's going to be a theater market or theater visibility opposed to.
He firmly believes that theaters will be packed. Like, of course, he's talking a lot about Spider-Man. And Jim Giannopoulos, who was the CEO of Paramount yesterday at the Paramount presentation, also said theaters are going to be packed when things are normal. And, you know, the trade press is sort of pushing this meme. They had another survey, NRG, which is the sort of the go-to for theatrical business type research projects. They had a survey that came out Friday, and the numbers were the highest they've ever been. Of course, they didn't give a lot of the details in terms of what exactly it means when there's vaccine is widespread. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, when is it widespread? You know, so there's a lot of factors going into this, but he does believe that once the doors open, everyone's going to come rushing back. But I will give him credit. What he did say also was that the era of just making something good is not going to cut it anymore. That has to be great. In other words, he used a quote that Beyonce once gave to someone who asked, like, the key to her success, and she said, make dope shit. And that's sort of like Tom's mantra now. Is like, we have to make dope shit. If we're going to get people back into the theaters, we have to sort of step it up. And this sort of ties again to the idea of the scene that we talked a little bit about earlier in our pre-show, sort of from The Holiday. For those of you who don't watch the movie, haven't seen the movie, there's a scene where Kate Winslet's character she befriends this writer in LA, and she goes to the WGA, and he's being honored, and the first thing he says is, I remember, because he'd worked for MGM in the heyday of Louis B. Mayer's office and yada yada yada, and he says, I remember the time when box offices weren't reported like baseball scores on the evening news, and we may be headed back to that time where it's not that, and where if Tom's mantra, make dope shit, holds, then we're looking at an era where there aren't going to be 10 movies every weekend, because the studios are going to have to be like, we need to make a great movie that's going to get people back in the theaters, and we have to work with the exhibitors to figure out a way to improve the movie-going experience, because that's what's going to require.
I think those words just pulled out every multiplex in every hometown in the United States, right? Where we're trying to say there's one big theater, there's one great show, come watch it. Instead of there are 10 things to watch this weekend, buy tickets on Friday night for this show and Saturday night for this show, because we've been pushing this for months upon months. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Saturday morning, take your kids to the cartoon version of, you know, the latest storyline too.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Like that, I think the major distribution channels going to OTT really leave the theatrical experience to a different type of play out. And why not take all the theaters on 42nd Avenue in New York and turn those into movieplexes as well as live show venues? Because those, like, you got to get people in the seats somehow if you're going to have real estate in New York doing that. And if it's good stuff, people will kind of come and watch that. It does feel like people's confidence is kind of coming back into play. The vaccine storyline or whatever people are believing when it comes to the virus pandemic that we've been living out for a while. The narratives are changing in such a way that most states are opening up. Of course, the communist state of California, they're still shutting things down, but even New York City is the loudest player in the field originally. Someone's kind of saying like, we got to get back to work. So I think the trends are going to be there. Some of my hope is just that the filmmakers start recognizing there's opportunity in this game. I mean, as the world just got flat for them, don't fall behind.
Yeah.
And be the front runner of that. If they're looking for good stuff to put on the theater, come up with a good idea. You don't have to have a long played career in order to get good stuff on the screen. Yeah.
And I think I think there's a column in today's Wall Street Journal from Peggy Noonan, who's a columnist. And there was some really great bites in the article. Now her point of reference is basically New York City and bringing it back to life. But she also talks a lot about institutions that have sort of really struggled through this. And I think this is a very apt point. And I'm going to quote her article directly. She says, so many institutions will have to be nimble and farsighted now or they won't survive. They're going to have to be nimble, creative, and generous and leave old intransiencies behind. To lead in times like this requires the eyes of an artist who sees a broad shape of things, not an analyst who sees data points. And I think that's well served to your point about these content creators and directors and producers have to leave the past behind and look for new opportunities, because the other point that she made was also that people think everything will just snap back once the pandemic's over, but that's not true. Human habits have been broken and a new way of operating has begun. That's her quote. And I think she's absolutely right. And you have to sort of dig down and figure out, what can we do? What can we take an opportunity to change the things that weren't working before? And I think that if the mantra coming out of the industry is going to be that we open the doors, they'll come rushing in, then the industry, I think, is going to be shocked, because then they're going to be waiting a long time for it to actually be a point where it's profitable, because New York is open, but it's 25% capacity, which is like 25 or 50 people. A blockbuster like Black Widow cannot make back its budget with 50 people.
I think that's a great way to wrap up this episode, because we all know that that's what's true. And honestly, the reason why we got in this business, right? Yeah. To make dope shit, as you say, like to get something out there, to put the artist expression first, and to not let it just be commoditized and pushed beyond those limits. If OTT is the one that's pushing the commodity and making just a series of constant feed using top stars on a weekly basis, let Netflix have that. But let's preserve then the theater experience for the great art. I'd love to see that in the future. All right, my friend. Well, another great episode. Thank you again for being part of this. I need to thank the people behind the scenes, because Lydia is not only just multitasking behind the scenes and keeping us on track for this show, she's also having to coach us through Clubhouse and how that process works. So Lydia, thank you for all that you're doing. We would not have this show without you. Curly Joe, thanks for helping us in support and making this show happen and getting it out there on the platforms. If you are interested in following us, we are on YouTube. You can find our channel there and subscribe there. Our episodes all exist that way. Keith and I are also available on Instagram. I post on LinkedIn. We post on Insta, all that stuff. So feel free to follow us, send us information, and of course, join us next week here live or in Clubhouse. We'd love to see you more. Keith, until next week, have a great week, and we'll just gather more stuff. I guess we'll watch the Globes and we'll report.
Maybe. I mean, my wife doesn't want to watch, but I might have to figure out a way to do it. And I just want to say, to finish on a positive note, opportunity is knocking in this business, in this industry. We just have to grasp it. This is the time when we can really make some impactful changes to an industry that's more or less been stagnant for the last 50 years. And this is our opportunity. Yeah, and on that note, I'm out.
All right. Thank you. All right. See you next week.
See you next week.